The morning sun rose over the purple hills of Velker Prime, casting long shadows across the farming villages that dotted the fertile valley below. The Velkorians had lived here for 3,000 years, peaceful creatures with soft blue skin and large black eyes that reflected their gentle nature. They had never known war. They had never needed weapons. Their civilization had evolved beyond such primitive concepts, or so they believed. Elder Morris stood outside his dwelling, watching the morning mist roll through the valley like a slow river of white clouds. He had seen many seasons, his once bright blue skin now faded to a pale gray. His village of Thornwick was the largest in the valley, home to nearly 500 souls who spent their days tending crops and raising their young in peace. The first sign that something was wrong came from the northern watchtower. A young Velkorian named Pell came running down the stone path, his thin legs carrying him faster than anyone had ever seen him move. His eyes were wide with something the villagers did not immediately recognize. It took them a moment to understand that what they were seeing was fear. Pell collapsed at Elder Morath's feet, gasping for air, his words tumbling out in broken fragments. He spoke of beings marching through the northern pass, thousands of them moving in perfect formation. He described creatures covered in metal, carrying shields that reflected the morning light like mirrors. He told them about the thunder of their feet, a sound so unified and powerful that it shook the very ground beneath them. Elder Morath tried to calm the young one, assuming he had simply encountered travelers from another world. The Velkorians had peaceful relations with dozens of alien species. There was nothing to fear from visitors. The Pell shook his head violently, tears streaming down his blue cheeks. These were not like any beings he had ever seen. These creatures marched as one entity, a single organism with thousands of bodies. And they carried weapons. The word spread through Thornwick like wildfire. Weapons. The villagers had only seen such things in ancient texts and historical databases. Their ancestors had abandoned violence so long ago that the very concept seemed alien to them. Some of the younger Velkorians did not even understand what weapons were meant to do. Within the hour, the first scouts returned from the northern ridge with more detailed reports. The beings were humanoid in shape, standing about average height for most species. Their bodies were covered in metal plates and leather strips. Each one carried a large rectangular shield and a short blade at their side. Their heads were protected by metal helmets with red plumes that waved in the wind like flames. But it was not their appearance that terrified the scouts. It was how they moved. Every step was synchronized. Every movement was deliberate. When they turned together. When they stopped as one. The scouts had never witnessed such discipline, such absolute control over individual bodies working as a collective unit. It was unnatural. It was terrifying. The leader of these beings rode on a strange four-legged animal, sitting high above his soldiers. He wore a cape of deep red that flowed behind him, and his armor was decorated with golden symbols that meant nothing to the Velkorian observers. But his face was what haunted them most. It showed no emotion, no hesitation, no mercy. It was the face of a predator who had already decided the fate of its prey. Elder Morath called an emergency gathering in the central square. Every adult Velkorian in Thornwick stood shoulder to shoulder, their voices rising in confusion and panic. Some argued they should send a delegation to greet these newcomers and offer friendship. Others insisted they should hide in the underground caves that ran beneath the valley. A few suggested they contact the Galactic Council for assistance, but that would take days, perhaps weeks. While they debated, a young female named Syrah climbed the watchtower to observe the approaching force. What she saw changed everything. The beings had stopped at the entrance to the valley, and their leader was addressing them in a language she did not understand. But she understood the effect his words had on his soldiers. They raised their weapons to the sky and roared with a unified voice that echoed across the hills. It was not a sound of greeting. It was a sound of war. Sira ran back to the gathering and reported what she had witnessed. The debate ended immediately. Without organization, without planning, the Valkyrians of Thornwick began to flee. They grabbed their children and their elderly, leaving behind everything they owned. Food, clothing, treasured family items that had been passed down for generations were abandoned in their homes. Nothing mattered except escape. The panic spread faster than the physical evacuation. Runners were sent to every village in the valley, carrying the same message. Strange beings approach. They carry weapons. They move like a single monster with countless bodies. Run. Village after village emptied. The Valkyrians streamed southward in massive waves of blue bodies, their soft voices crying out in terror. Farmers dropped their tools in the fields. Teachers left their classrooms mid-lesson. Families separated in the chaos, parents screaming the names of children they could not find in the crowds. Meanwhile, the Ramang Legion entered the valley. Centurion Marcus Aurelius Corvinus led his men through the northern pass, his eyes scanning the landscape with tactical precision. He had no idea where they were or how they had arrived here. The last thing he remembered was leading his century through a strange mist that had appeared during their march through Germania. When the mist cleared, they found themselves in this alien place with its purple hills and unfamiliar stars. But Marcus was a Roman soldier. He had been trained to adapt, to survive, to conquer. Whatever magic had brought them here, whatever gods were testing them, he would not fail. His men looked to him for guidance, and he would give them purpose. They would march until they found civilization. They would establish contact. They would survive. The first village they encountered was completely empty. Marcus ordered his men to search the dwellings carefully, looking for threats and supplies. They found neither weapons nor warriors. The homes were filled with strange objects they did not understand, glowing crystals and humming devices that served unknown purposes. But there was food, strange in appearance, but edible, and clean water in abundance. Marcus allowed his men to rest and eat, maintaining strict discipline even in this bizarre situation. The Legion had rules, procedures, traditions that had been refined over centuries of warfare. These structures gave them strength when everything else was uncertain. They ate in shifts. They posted guards. They maintained their formation even while resting. As the day progressed, the Legion moved through 3 more villages, each one as empty as the last. The inhabitants had fled with such haste that meals were left on tables, still warm. Doors stood open. Personal belongings were scattered on the ground where they had been dropped in panic. Optio Gaius, Marcus's second-in-command, approached him with concern in his eyes. These people feared them. That much was clear. But why had they not attempted to communicate or negotiate? Why had they simply run without even trying to understand who the Romans were or what they wanted? Marcus had been pondering the same question. In all his years of service, he had encountered many different peoples. Some had fought, some had surrendered, some had tried to bargain. But he had never seen an entire population abandon their homes without a single attempt at interaction. It suggested either extreme cowardice or extreme wisdom. The truth was something Marcus could not have imagined. The Valkyrians were not primitive. They were, in many ways, far more advanced than any civilization Marcus had ever encountered. They had spacecraft that could travel between stars. They had technology that could cure any disease. They had communication systems that connected their entire world in an instant. But they had forgotten something that the Romans had never lost. They had forgotten how to fight. Across the galaxy, species had evolved in different ways. Some, like the Valkyrians, had emerged on peaceful worlds with abundant resources and no natural predators. They had never needed violence to survive. They had never developed the instincts, the muscles, the mental frameworks required for combat. War was simply not part of their biological or cultural heritage. Humans were different. Humans had crawled out of a world that actively tried to kill them at every moment. They had competed with predators, survived ice ages, endured famines and plagues. They had fought each other for resources, territory, and power. Violence was woven into their very DNA, refined by millions of years of survival pressure. The Roman legion represented the absolute peak of this violent evolution. They were not merely humans. They were humans who had dedicated their entire existence to the perfection of organized warfare. Every aspect of their culture, their training, their equipment, their tactics had been designed for one purpose: victory. The Galactic Council received a distress signal from Velker Prime 3 days later. The message described an invasion force of unknown origin, approximately 5,000 individuals moving through the main agricultural valley. The Volcorians reported that the invaders appeared to be unaugmented biologicals, carrying primitive metal weapons and wearing non-powered armor. Council Analyst Thorne reviewed the data with growing confusion. The invaders matched no known species in the galactic database. Their technology appeared to be ancient, perhaps thousands of years behind current standards. They had no energy weapons, no force shields, no automated combat systems. By all logical analysis, they should pose no threat to anyone. But the analyst also noted the evacuation patterns on Velker Prime. Over 200,000 Velcorians had fled their homes in a matter of days. Agricultural production had collapsed. Emergency shelters were overflowing. The psychological impact of this invasion was catastrophic, far beyond what the invaders' actual capabilities should have caused. Analyst Thorne flagged the report for priority review and added a personal note. The invaders were something she had only read about in theoretical xenobiology texts. They were apex predators who had achieved technological civilization without losing their predatory nature. They were pack hunters who had learned to coordinate their violence with mathematical precision. They were, in essence, the galaxy's nightmare scenario. Back on Velker Prime, Marcus had established a fortified camp using the buildings and materials from the largest abandoned village. His men had adapted quickly to their situation, using their engineering skills to create defensive positions and organize their supplies. The Legion was designed to be self-sufficient, capable of operating far from Rome for extended periods. The Centurion stood on a hill overlooking the empty valley, watching the sun set over the purple hills. He did not understand this world or its people. He did not know if they would ever find a way back to Rome. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: the Legion would endure. It had survived barbarian hordes, desert heat, frozen winters, and political chaos. It would survive this strange new world as well. Wherever they were, whatever challenges they faced, they would maintain their discipline, their training, their Roman identity. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the valley, 100,000 Velcorians huddled in caves and makeshift shelters, too afraid to return home. They had seen death march through their lands in perfect formation. They had witnessed the face of war for the first time in their civilization's history. And they knew, with instinctive certainty, that they were no longer safe in a universe where such creatures existed. The Roman eagle standards flew proudly over the occupied village, bronze wings catching the last light of the alien sun. The Legion had found a new land, and history was about to repeat itself in ways the galaxy had never imagined possible.